Not at all.
Not at all.
You think? Yeah.
I absolutely will. And what's stopping?
Yeah, it was embracing a new queer function, which is 24/7 lunch.
Okay.
That's plus big.
Yeah. Well, at the same time, eating is lunch at 12 o'clock.
I think we're fine now. Okay.
Because I have something to joke with.
I'll be like a friend told me.
Don't surprise the world of your lunch.
I already stopped 90% of the jokes that I had. This thing is
Okay, welcome everybody to this last OASIS lunchtime talk of 2025. And fittingly, our topic goes to the core of game studies, game mechanics. And here to give the talk, we have Professor Rafael Marques de Albuquerque from the State University of Santa Catarina. Take it away.
Right. So thank you very much. Before anything, I just want to say that I'm very happy and even honored to be speaking here in the University of Tampere. And I will introduce briefly myself. And I think if you understand where I'm coming from, you will also understand what the nature of my research project at the moment. So yeah, I am actually doing my research in the context of the State University of Santa Catarina, but I am actually a lecturer or a professor in the University of Vale Itajaí. So my background is in design, graphic design, and I really hated it. So at the end of my course, I realized that some people in my university was doing this very weird thing that was studying video games. That was a very strange thing to be doing in my university, the Federal University of Santa Catarina in 2008. So, I took the chance. I began to do research on that at the end of my major, and then I did my master's on design as well. And then I went to England, to the University of Nottingham, to do my doctorate degree in the Learning Sciences Research Institute in Nottingham. So when I went back to Brazil, I was hired by the University of Vale Itajaí to teach in a game development course. So that was a bit different, right? So I had to learn a lot of things to teach in a game development course. And I was teaching initially game design and narrative design. And then I have this experience of teaching game design and narrative design in the beginning of the course, and then it's a 4-year-long bachelor's course. And at the end, I would supervise some of their projects. And I realized that some of the students would reach the end of the course really being very able to think in terms of game design, right? They would really have lots of ideas. They would really take advantage of their repertoire. They would be very good in problem solving, and so it would flow very well. But some of the students really struggled. They would feel like stuck. I mean, I do have a game that needs to be well thought, but they didn't know how to fix it, how to make it better. And I was realizing how difficult it is to teach game design. Because when we talk about game design, sometimes we talk about what some people call praxeology. So it's basically the knowledge about the practice. So, how to prototype an idea, how to organize a document, how to conduct a brainstorming session. It's all about the practice of game design. But then there's this other part that some people would say the phenomenology of game design. It's basically understanding the relationship between player and game and what kind of experiences that you can try to generate with that, right? So that part is a lot based on intuition and gut feeling. And that was something that makes it very difficult to teach. So in our course, every semester they have like a module that they have to develop games. right, in my university. And then they also have game jams in which they even develop more games. And something that we realized, we as the group of professors, is that it would be good to have a module, an extra module, just for the theory of gameplay, just for the theory of game mechanics and player experiences, because all this content was kind of spread out in the modules in which they were also developing games. So they created this new module, it's called Gameplay Theory, and then they decided that I should be the one teaching it. And I was beginning to collect material. So what should be the theoretical foundation, right, for this module on gameplay and game mechanics? So I found stuff like this books from the Playful Thinking series from MIT. They are very nice books. They are very accessible. And so here are two examples, like the Art of Failure of Jasper Drew and Uncertainty in Games from Greg Kostikian. They are really selecting one dimension of games and going very deep into it, and they were very nice, and I incorporated those, some of those in my module as a reading material or just kind of a foundational kind of text. But then there were two things that I was really missing, and that's kind of part of the research that I'm doing now. And the first thing is that even though they're very good material, a lot of them take like one dimension of the gaming experience or gaming possibility, and they go into that. And I really wanted to have some kind of map of all these possibilities of player experiences, right? So here, by the way, I'm also a novelist, so that's the map of the universe I created, but that's another thing. But the idea is that I wanted to offer and to work with my students with some kind of map that shows them all these possibilities in terms of game mechanics. So in a way, if they are developing a game and they are a bit unsure about how the game should be, they kind of could travel in this map and search for possible kinds of experiences and mechanics that could be good for the game, right? So yeah, we had lots of maps like that already, and we have even like kind of older material like the classic book Men Playing Games from Calois. I suppose many people here will know this book. It's kind of a response to Johan Huizinga, more classic text on games, and in which he kind of described these kind of 6 categories of games, like Alea, Agon, Mimicry, Lynx, Ludus, and Peda. But then, it was not about digital games, but we still kind of use this as a historical reference. And then we have more contemporary stuff, like, for instance, the BrainX model of the typology of players. So they basically divide players in categories depending on the kind of fun that they like in games, based on the kind of stimulation that they want in their brain, right? So if you like the feeling in your brain where something like, I'm gonna die, then you probably are in the survivor sort of category of player. So even though it's a typology of players, it does kind of shows the kinds of experience that we can find in games. I suppose the BrainX model is kind of similar to the more famous one, the Bartol typology of players that was some decades earlier. So and one of the most, I suppose, complete one of these kind of maps of player experiences that I know of is the Quantic Foundry model. It was proposed by Nick Yee and others, and it is very complete because they do have this kind of 6 pillars of kinds of motivation of players, and then each one of these pillars have like 2 dimensions, as we can see in the image, and then each of these 12 dimensions has also its opposite. So let's say in the first column we have the column of action, and then one of the dimensions of action is excitement. So basically, if you really want fast-paced, chaotic kind of games, it's kind of your kind of pleasure, let's say. But then the opposite would be a gaming experience that is calm, that's contemplative, that's also a kind of pleasure, right? So at the end we have like 24 different kinds of experiences in games. It's a very kind of complete map, let's say. But, well, something that I was also wanting to have with my students was not only like a big map like those, but I also wanted to talk to them about more specific sort of topics. I wanted to discuss game mechanics, right? Because lots of the gaming literature, they will discuss a lot some of these foundational concepts of gaming experience, right? Like uncertainty or challenge or rewards. They are like these big concepts. But my point was, how can I help my students to make this bridge between these big concepts that are crucial and the mechanics, the very specific mechanics that they will have to choose to be in their games to reach the experience that they want. So when we talk about game design, there are different ways of dealing with more specific sort of solutions to games. One of them is heuristics, which I will have to say that I think in general design heuristics tend to be more useful for more technical stuff. So they are more useful to things like accessibility. So accessibility and usability heuristics, they are very kind of technical, direct to the point. But when it comes to developing mechanics to generate a fun, engaging experience, then the heuristics, I mean, they do have like engagement heuristics, but they're not so much explored, I would say. So another approach to that is game design patterns, right? So patterns is this idea that comes from architecture, like lots of other things from design, and this idea that we can recognize things that are repeated and kind of systematize this knowledge so other people can reproduce these patterns. And here is one of the famous books about patterns in game design by Bjork and Holopainen, in which they described hundreds and hundreds of game design patterns. And they have so many patterns to describe that you cannot even find all of them in the book. You have a CD room because it is oldish, yes, oldish book to complement it, right? So that's one of the approaches to talk about more specific sort of game mechanics and this kind of things. And I also found out more recently that there is also this other book that's more recent, Pattern Language for Game Design from Chris Barney, that is, I think, from 2022 or something. That also has lots of game design patterns. Now, they don't have a CD room, but they have a website to complement the patterns from their book, from his book. So here is kind of one way of addressing what I wanted with my students. But something that I realized is that even though they do approach it in a very practical sense, lots of the patterns, they are still talking about this kind of bigger concepts, right? So we have lots of these game design patterns are things like, competition, or even things like avatar, in the sense of the in-game representation of the player. So like, yeah, they had some things that were very concrete and specific, that just like I wanted, but it was also mixed with loads of patterns that are very similar to this kind of foundational concepts of gaming experience. So what did I do with my module? Well, I was partially inspired by the Game Ontology project by José Sagallo and others. They developed a wiki that was called the Game Ontology project. So the students had to write and contribute to this wiki as a pedagogical tool, right? So I wanted to do something similar in my modules. It began in 2020, and I created this wiki. It was created in Fandom. And then my students had to create articles, but different from the Game Ontology project, in which they were tackling the kind of bigger foundational concepts of gaming. I wanted my students to select very specific game mechanic and then write an article about it. And they have to engage with this activity twice in the module, because they had to create a new article, but they also have the choice later to improve a colleague article, because the nature of a wiki is kind of, the collaboration is kind of one of the main points. So I brought here two kind of examples just to illustrate the kind of specificity that I'm talking about. They are in Portuguese, but I mean, I just want the titles really. So here is one article made by my students about cooldown. You know, this kind of very specific mechanic that if the player takes an action, he or she has to wait some time until he or she can take the action again. So it's cooldown. And obviously, it's kind of a very kind of, let's say, a very technical detail, let's say, but at the same time, you can create a whole group, a whole system of cooldown, right? Because if you have a cooldown mechanic in your game, then you can have, I don't know, like magic items or different kinds of skills that increase or decrease the cooldown time. So, you know, you can work a lot with a concept such as cooldown. Or let's say fast travel. That's another article from the wiki. Fast travel, basically, if you want your player to be in one place and walking until this place will be very boring because there's nothing to do, you just add this, you know, game mechanic of fast travel. You can kind of go straight to the point in which things are fun. So they were developing all these articles, and I mean, if you can see from the fast travel one, they were doing things like the description of the mechanic, of the origin of the mechanic, if they could find any clue about that, and then limitations, tips, the function in player experience, and so on. So at the end, I had this, and they applied this for 5 years with my students. So it was the same wiki, and they were increasing more and more articles and more game mechanics, until the point in which some of my students were kind of complaining because I don't know what else I have to write because there's so much written already, right? So that was something that was really kind of, it made sense to me. And then I had this idea, this horrible idea, not horrible idea. I had this thing about doing a second PhD. I don't recommend it, but when I was writing the research project, I really had this idea of, well, yeah, I want to work with these kind of things, but I think it needs to be organized. Because at the end, the wiki was like chaotic, right? 5 years of students doing whatever they think it's correct in the wiki. You know, there was lots of messy kind of articles and stuff. So I wanted to organize it. So that's my current research project at the State University of Santa Catarina. And if you think about people who tried to create categories to organize all this huge number of game mechanics that exist, I did find a recent paper that goes kind of in a similar direction to me. This paper from Ali Tajuddin and Bramantoro, Classification of Game Mechanics, a brief review, in which they did make like a review from lots of famous books on game design, and they wrote down all the kind of game mechanics that they found, and they proposed a way of categorizing it in 6 groups. And, you know, some of them are very specific, a bit like what I wanted, but some of them are still kind of very wide concepts. And, but I also added here, because I am proposing a theoretical model that has categories, and some of the categories resemble a bit. So I think they are going in a similar direction to where I have been. Another paper that I found recently that I found very interesting that can be considered like a similar kind of work is this paper from, there are lots of authors, Samarasinghe, Barlow, Lakshika, Liner, Mustafa, Townsend, and Turnbull. They made this kind of map of game mechanics of board games, right? So what they did is that they compiled loads and loads of game mechanics from the Board Game Geek website. So they had loads and loads of data, and they applied lots of statistic processes to try to understand how to organize kind of in a map, in an image, all these mechanics, right? So which kind of mechanics is closer to each other and which one is far from each other. So in a way, that's a bit like what I wanted to do to this piece of research, a kind of spatial map that includes very specific game mechanics. Even though their work is based on board games, mine is based on digital games, and their process and their methods are mostly statistical, whereas I'm working with a more thinking about like the meaning of all these mechanics. But that's the kind of thing that I'm kind of talking about. So what did I do so far? I wanted to have a big list of game mechanics, right? That would be the kind of initial point. And then I created this big list using these two sources, the wiki that I used for 5 years with my students, and I also used lots of, from the Bjork and Holopainen's book, and I had this kind of initial list of mechanics. And that was a kind of, it took me a lot of work to do that, because I had to kind of organize, especially, I mean, the Patterns of Game Design book obviously is very organized, written by scholars, but my wiki was very chaotic. So I had to unify articles that were duplicated and kind of select what is the best terminology to use to say any of them, because I couldn't just use whatever my students wanted, you know. So, so I have here an example. So in a game like Grand Theft Auto, if you want to go faster, you can drive a car, right? So you can move more quickly in the game, and it also changes the way that you can move, in the sense of the input and the output that you add and receive, the way that the car reacts to you. But then if you're playing a game, let's say, like Breath of the Wild, and you want to go faster, you can ride a horse. That's basically, you know, the same mechanic, right? So you just go faster, and it changes a bit the way that you control your movement. But then if you take, like, let's say, I don't know, Dungeons & Dragons Shadow of Mystara, a very old game now, and you have a character that has a skill called Haste that makes you temporarily go faster. It's just all the same, right? It's just kind of different kinds of disguise to the same mechanic or the same idea. And then we have also something like, you know, in a Pokemon game, if you use the ability like Surf, you can, you know, walk in water, and then you can access new areas that you didn't have access before. So again, it's kind of a similar thing. So it changed all of that. I decided, for instance, to call movement variation. So I decided to solve all these things. They are all in the umbrella of the mechanic of movement variation. So I had to take lots of decisions, such as this one. You know, things like if you want to stop another player or another NPC to take in action, you have things like, you know, you can slow, but you can stun, but you can freeze, but you can, you know, that's different words, but the same concept. And that's very challenging, because other people could take choices differently, right? So I decided to include something like going into water in a Pokemon game in the same category. So that's all movement variation. But then perhaps some of you would say, well, no, that's different, because it's not only making you faster, it's giving access to the new areas in the game, and therefore it should be a different mechanic, because it's a completely different concept. So at the end, there's lots of small decisions that I had to make to kind of organize this stuff. But I suppose in the same way that game design, the work of the game designer is a bit intuitive and is a bit gut feeling, I suppose there's a lot of this kind of intuitive and based on experience sort of decision making in order to produce the model. So that's just one example. And then what did I do? Well, then I printed all this mechanics that I had in cards with very short descriptions. And that's something that's not really part of the thesis. It's kind of a baby that was born of the thesis, but it's not going to be there, I suppose. But the idea is that I wanted to find usages for this kind of content, especially educational usages. So I already developed some time ago a game called Comenius Pocket that is an educational card game, and I was inspired by that. And then I created this cards to propose this gaming practice with my students. So it was supposed to be played in teams. I did apply it earlier this year with my students. So they played in teams, and each team would receive some of the mechanics in a random selection. And you know, we had some kind of mechanics so they could swap cards and stuff, but at the end they have to propose a game concept, like in a game pitch, a very short presentation of the game concept, using the game mechanics that they received. And they were rewarded for two different things. They were rewarded if they could find a very innovative way of using one mechanic, right? So if there is one mechanic that seems to be kind of, you know, basic or boring, or then you suddenly find that you can think about a whole new game based on this mechanic in a very kind of different way. That would be rewarded in the game, but also we would also reward players that could find very interesting and innovative combination of mechanics. So sometimes mechanics that they don't normally go well together, but then you find a way to combine them in a very nice concept that would also be rewarded in the game. So it was this was a way of finding already educational usages for what I was developing. And it was also interesting to get me familiarized with all this mechanics that I was developing. I did apply not only with my students, but also in the academic mind track as a workshop here, and I applied also in SIGs in Poland earlier this year. So that's something that it's kind of a bonus way of trying to find ways of applying that. So it was also very useful to have it, because the next step was trying to organize it. So as I had this printed, it was very good to kind of, okay, how can we organize in space? What are the game mechanics that are related to each other? And how can I kind of create groups and categories? So that was in my house here in Tampere, kind of using Post-its and my cards, just to kind of find a way to organize it in a way that would make sense. And that was also very challenging, because we're talking about a complex kind of problem. So let's say a very kind of basic mechanic like double jump. Well, I did call multiple jump because why be limited to two, right? So multiple jump. So if you jump, you can jump again before you hit the ground, right? I suppose what kind of experience can we provide to our players if we use something like double jump? Well, I suppose in general, if you think about, I don't know, like It Takes Two, what we do is that we open up the possibilities of creating dexterity challenges. So now they have to, jump in the correct timing and in the correct direction and react well. So it's a kind of one tool to create dexterity challenges, I would say, right? Okay, and then obviously we can also use the space better if we have double jump. So yeah, that's pretty straightforward. But then if we look at a game like Celeste, and it also applies to It Takes Two to some extent. We have these levels in which you have to reach the end of the level, and Celeste, I suppose maybe some would argue that's not really double jump; it's more like a dash. But let's just consider that's double jump here. Celeste is not challenging the player just in terms of dexterity, because it kind of creates puzzles. You have to really think in advance what's the best strategy to use your jumps and climbing and these kind of special crystals that give you extra jumps. How can you combine it in a way that you can reach the end? So it's more like a puzzle. It's more like an intelligence kind of challenge. So at the end, the point is you can pick one game mechanic that can normally be used for one thing and used for something that's almost like the opposite. So when we are trying to classify the mechanics, and I classify, oh yeah, this mechanic works for that. But at the end, well, not really, because it could work in other ways. So what I have done is that I try to place game mechanics where it seemed to me that it's more aligned to that kind of experience, right? But not necessarily it's limited to that. And here I have even another example in a game like Hollow Knight, in which like other Metroidvania sort of games, the double jump has even a different function, because one of the points of a double jump in a Metroidvania is that you go through a level and there are areas that you cannot access because it's too high, but then later on you learn double jump, and then you go back to the same level and you access new areas, right? So it's a kind of an exploration. It's a way of exploring the exploration part of the game. So again, wow, lots of different ways of using one kind of concept. So I was trying to organize it, and that's something that I am still working on. But at the moment is like that. I decided that would make sense to my group of mechanics to have this 7 categories. As I said before, it has some similarities with the paper that I showed earlier. So far, it has like one dimension of socialization in the sense of game mechanics that improve or simulate the different kinds of socialization in interaction between players. And then there is another one that is aesthetics that include all kinds of appreciation of a game in a more artistic sense, both narrative, sound, and image. And I did kind of separate them from the rest because, in my opinion, they kind of point towards other dimensions of game experience. That it's not really the game mechanic itself, but it's the interaction with other people or the kind of artistic value of the game. And then I have this kind of main structure in which I included complexity in the middle because at the end I realized that lots of game mechanics, they could be seen as ways of adding layers to the game to make it more complex, and therefore adding new ways of playing and different possibilities of uncertainty and all this kind of basic level of player engagement. And then we have these 4 other dimensions. In the vertical sense, we have dexterity at the top and strategy at the bottom. That's a very kind of classic way of defining a player experience in terms of challenges of the mind and challenges of the hand, this kind of thing. So, mechanics that are more inclined to one or another. And then in the horizontal, we have information and difficulty dimensions. So information is basically all the mechanics that affect the information that the player has. So some people call it like a feedback function. So it doesn't change the game state, but it changes the information that the player has access. Whereas difficulty is lots of game mechanics that are very useful to increase or decrease the level of difficulty, so it can make it more appealing to the level of skill of the player. So that's the kind of how it is right now. But then, I mean, you could just see, there's lots of models just like yours that is kind of the same. But I think what's different about that is that it comes with all the game mechanics, right? Just like all the game mechanics that I have right now and the ones that I still want to add. So it really becomes some kind of map that includes very specific game mechanics that are associated to each of the dimensions. So that's what the kind of thing that I am walking towards. And yeah, so I'm not going. And then obviously we have the mechanics that fit in one of the categories, but we also have mechanics that fit in these regions in between. So that's the overlap, right, of the categories. So yeah, so that's kind of the point in which I am right now. And but then I realized that some of the dimensions they were missing here. I had different categories here that excluded, and I thought, that's a very interesting way of thinking into mechanics. I don't want them to be excluded. And I have this problem that sometimes, as I said before, one mechanic is like in one position, but it's like very good to other things that are not corresponding to the position in the map. So what I did is I added this kind of label system. So each one of these game mechanics would have a description of how it works, what's the concept, but it would come with a tag, one or more tags. That's something that also game design patterns tend to use, like tags and stuff like that. So I'm still kind of working the tags, but so far I added this ones. So I have randomness, so mechanics that are very good to increase the randomness of the game. Design that I just copied from the Quantic Foundry model. So basically mechanics that allow the player to design his or her own things, characters or his own or her house or stuff. Choices, so mechanics that are very good in offering this experience of taking choices. That's one of the foundational concepts of gaming experiences. Mechanics that are very good to improve exploration. Mechanics that are very good to strengthen the illusion of power of the player. And mechanics that are very good to the experience of feeling rewarded, right? So basically one mechanic could have one position and some tags attached to it, and that will be kind of the model. That's the kind of the initial version. And then what I wanted to do, that's the step that I'm actually working at the moment, is that I wanted to find, well, I wanted to think that this model could be used not only to teach future game designers, but also it could be used as an analytical tool, right? So if you want to take a game and analyze in detail in terms of its mechanics, you could use such a model to see what kind of mechanics it's using, right? So I selected one game that I thought was complex enough to use as a kind of example or a case study to see how this model could be used as an analytical tool. And then I selected, League of Legends. And then some people can find, why did you select that game? Well, the first thing is that it is very big and successful for a long time now, and it is active for around 15 years after launch, and they are still kind of launching new champions. And each champion has like 4 or more skills, so it is a lot of material to analyze. So I thought it would be a very interesting case study. So what I'm doing now is that I'm doing this. So why I'm doing this? First is to illustrate the potential of the model to illustrate to be used as an analytical tool, and also I want to expand the model by incorporating more game mechanics. And I think that's one of the points. I want to check what are the game mechanics that League of Legends is using and each one of the champions. But I also want to see what are the game mechanics that the game is using and it's not in the model. So I can incorporate more in the model. Because, a model such as this one that I'm proposing will be never complete, right? It's kind of impossible to have all game mechanics that exist. It's not something that I'm trying to do. But I'm trying to do it to have mechanics enough to, give lots of material to think and to help the creative process. So the idea is that my model will kind of swallow the mechanics that are in League of Legends. That's kind of the point. And so I'm doing things like this, like lost in an Excel file, looking character by character. Okay, what are the game mechanics that each one of these 172, I think, characters are using? Okay, so that's, yeah. And then here I have just some reflections. Such a model or such an analytical tool could provide a detailed analytical tool for research questions such as, I'm not going into any of these research questions, they're just kind of to illustrate the kind of things that we could think of. So for instance, if we want to, are there significant mechanical differences between male and female characters in League of Legends? If you have all this data about all the mechanics of all the characters, you could kind of analyze this kind of things. Or things like, which mechanics were emphasized in each historical phase of League of Legends? So, what are the game mechanics that were more common in the first champions and what are the ones that became popular later on? Or things like, we want to make a comparison between like League of Legends and its big rival, let's say Dota 2, and then you want to make a very detailed mechanical analysis of each of them and compare. Well, you could use such a tool. Or things like, what are the mechanics that are present in most popular champions? So, the champions that players really choose to pick. Do they have like a pattern? Do they have like mechanics that are very common and that become popular? So that's the kind of thing. And obviously all these questions are about League of Legends, but the things that you could apply this as an analytical tool to any other digital game. And then I have here some reflections about kind of limitations of the work. I think one of the main points of limitation of this work is the amount of subjective decisions that I had to make such a model. I think at that point you just have to embrace it because there's no way you could escape from that. So what is game mechanic that is specific to the right point that I want, that's not too vague, too abstract, but it's not specific, too specific, or how do I call it, and what kind of mechanics that I group together and what I don't. All this are kind of very arbitrary in a way. So I just have here an example of one of the League of Legends characters that's called Ilaoi, and she has this kind of skill in which she kind of throws like a tentacle in an enemy character, and if she hits, she pulls some kind of the soul of the character. So it kind of creates like a simulacrum, a representation of this other character. I suppose it could be similar to this kind of racist idea of a voodoo doll. But anyway, so it creates this kind of simulacrum, and then if you hit this simulacrum, this image, the original character will suffer damage as well. So what is it? I mean, that's a very specific mechanic. Should I include that in my model? I mean, I was trying to look for mechanics that are more, widely able to be used, right? So, for instance, this one, I thought, oh no, that's I will leave out of the system. But then, it could be there. I mean, and there's lots of mechanics that are such as this one. They are very unique, very specific. And then I decided, because I am doing the model, this one will stay out. It's too unique. But again, I think we just, at that point, just have to embrace that, yeah, that will be a model that has a lot of this kind of things. And then there is another thing that I just wanted to comment before the end, that I think a model such as this one has to be seen as a plastic tool. So as I told before, it will never be complete because it's kind of impossible. And I also wanted to comment on the problem of capacity loss, because one of the mechanics that included in the system is capacity loss. So if you have some kind of skill or some kind of action that you take that another player or an NPC loses some kind of capacity temporarily, right? That's capacity loss. But let's say in a game like League of Legends, there are like, I don't know, 8 different types of capacity loss. Like as it was saying before, you can slow your opponent, you can like the person cannot move anymore, you can stun, you can knock up, you can sleep. So at the end, this model, in the way that it is right now, it's very poor to analyze this dimension of the game, because that game has a very complex system of capacity loss. So let's say if you do want to make analysis of League of Legends, perhaps you could pick my model and say, well, but let's divide this capacity loss in 5, because then we have more granularity to analyze the game, right? Because in the way that it is now, it doesn't have granularity to that specific dimension. I included that character here because she does have lots of this kind of skills. So yeah. So now to end this short presentation, I'm at the moment analyzing the game. So what are the next steps now? Well, I want to finalize the game analysis of League of Legends, and then I want to add this extra mechanics to the model. Based on that, I want to write detailed descriptions for each mechanic, applying the corresponding tags. So I only have this kind of very short descriptions that I use for the card game, but I want to have a more complete version, because the model would be the organization of the mechanics, but also this individual descriptions of each of them. So I need that yet, and the corresponding tags. And at the end, the idea is that I want to consult, to have a conversation with game designers and or game scholars and or game design teachers in order to see their opinion on this model and how it could be used and how they see it and suggestions and stuff. So that's kind of the end of the process. So at the moment, that's the point I am in. And it's interesting because I have presented this proposal in a few places now, and some of the common things that people say is that, well, isn't game design some kind of art? It's a very kind of, it needs inspiration to do game design in a way. And then what you're doing is like you're kind of systematizing everything. You're kind of killing the artistic process of game design. And I don't know. In my opinion, I think we could kind of merge both, right? So we can try to create categories and analytical tools and try to organize in systematic ways, and then at the same time understand that that's just kind of the rule, and game design in many occasions will break the rule, and it's just like kind of learning the basics of painting before you begin to do like modern painting sort of thing. So yeah, that's my project at the moment. So thank you for your attention, and then I'm open to whatever you want to discuss now. Yeah, and this is the references that I use in the presentation. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Rafael. This was very interesting and really. I'm not a game mechanics scholar myself, but I can only imagine this was kind of like giving lots of thoughts to game designers and scholars on that field. But let's start taking questions. So first one, Mark.
Thank you very much for the talk. I have question with two questions inside.
Sorry.
I have two questions
questions,
inside
okay.
one. I would like to ask you to voice your definition of game mechanics, and why I ask it is because your example of League of Legends, this is something not very familiar to me, but since you compared it to proposed a comparison to Dota, I started thinking about the more familiar thing to me. And different time periods in Dota 2 changed a lot, yes, in terms of mechanics, but what players usually complain about is that there was a skill that had a duration of 5 seconds, and now it has a duration of 4.5. And I was wondering, according to your analysis and your definition of game mechanics, where would this change go to? Is it mechanical change? Is it rule change? What changed when that duration was limited to a lower number?
Okay, yeah. Thank you for the question. And yeah, I think it's we can go into the kind of tricky area about the rule of the game and the game mechanic. And in my understanding, I mean, the rule of the game is kind of the foundational, structure. The game is made of rules essentially, and then I like to call it mechanics in digital games, because it seems that when we have the rule of the game in other kinds of games, analytical games, there's lots of space for negotiation and whether someone understands or not the rule and applies the rule or breaks the rule, whereas in the game the rule is already kind of in the game and it kind of applies itself, so you don't have to learn it in advance, and it kind of imposes itself on the player. So it's almost like a law of nature, right? So I do like the idea of using the word mechanic, but I suppose they would kind of have I could say the rule. I mean, a system of rules. I think it would work in the same way, but and I think if they change in half a second, the duration, and I think in competitive games there's a lot of things like this, right? Half a second makes a huge difference. I mean, in my understanding, they are not changing the mechanic, but they are changing the way that they apply it, because at the end, each of the mechanics that I am trying to work in the model, they are in a specific level of specificity. So there are bigger concepts above, and there are also more specific things when you apply. So let's say that you have some kind of stun or a slow skill. You have to decide, right? It's 5 seconds or 4 seconds. It makes a difference. So that's a level of detail. That's an extra concreteness level of detail. But I think it's the same thing. But then it's the next level, right? Should it be 5 or 4 seconds? So, but then I'm not in the most specific level that I could reach. It's one level above. Otherwise, it would be even more impossible. Yeah. Thank you.
Hello. Yeah, thank you. Really interesting talk, and at least for myself, and I'm really interested in this kind of goal-oriented game mechanics, and especially the aesthetic experiences of those mechanics. And I was thinking about the picture you showed where you had the term aesthetics in the upper corner, and I would like you to elaborate that. Why did you include those things in the aesthetics section, because in my view, all of these game mechanics contribute to aesthetic experiences of gameplay, at least like on the embodied level and or like through soma aesthetics, because all these are this kind of non-verbal or non-conceptual, more like affective aesthetic experiences that can arise through these mechanics. So I would just like to hear your thoughts about that.
Yeah, I think aesthetic was a tricky word to use here, and I understand where you're coming from, because when we think about the word aesthetics, I mean, we can relate to more traditional art history sort of perspective in which we're talking about some kind of experience. But then when we have like the MDA famous system, you know, the dynamics, mechanics, and aesthetics, they do include like the whole experience, like you were saying, right? So in a sense, it's all aesthetics. So I think it's a very good point, because people who are familiarized with the MDA model could make this assumption, but I wanted to use, and perhaps I will change the name now, I will think about it, but I wanted to use aesthetics in the sense of, really, I mean, the kind of the kind of experience of appreciation, of admiration, of some kind of visual, the visuals, the sound, and the story, and not in keeping the interaction to all the rest. So yeah, I mean, we are very familiarized, I suppose, with this kind of division between ludologists and narratologists' ways of looking at a game, and I suppose the more narratologist perspective would kind of fit all there. I think that's what I meant by aesthetics here. But I agree with you. I mean, if you take an MDA approach, then it should be all. But yeah.
Yeah, thanks, of course. And the grouping makes sense, of course. I was just thinking about the word aesthetics. Yeah, thanks.
Do you have any suggestions about the word?
No suggestions?
No.
Right. Thank you so much for your presentation. I have a critical question. For better or worse, before I came here, I was in a research institution where there were a lot of ontologists, game ontologists. So
Okay.
I happen to know that there are a lot of ontologies out there. And as you already showed a couple of them, mostly design focused. There's also one with an ontology with 123 game elements.
Okay.
Yours seems to also go into the 100 types of elements, mechanics, however you like to call it. So my question is very much, why do we need another one? The questions that you just listed that it could potentially answer can also be answered by the other ontologies. So why another model?
Yeah, I mean, if you're referring to an ontology that I don't know, then I would love to know this one and understand what are the possible differences, or maybe they're not differences enough. So I mean, I cannot really respond to comparing my work with a work that I don't know. I mean, the ones that I've seen before, I think, I mean, I don't know. To me, the main point is precisely this kind of level of specificity of the game mechanics. That's the thing that I didn't remember seeing in other places, like double jump, you know, this kind of very specific level. But then if you know one that has it, and yes, yeah, I'll please want to if you can share with me later, and then I'll check how it relates to my work or not. So yeah.
Okay, so we have some comments on the chat. Juan Belio shares two. One would imagine spatial reasoning and dexterity here are a spectrum rather than opposites. And also, he says, I think a common issue with these sorts of frameworks is that they're hard to spread across large groups of designers. Do you think yours has a distinct advantage over others?
Well, see, well, yeah, I agree with what he said about the space and dexterity. I mean, they are in the same spectrum. I agree with that. But I mean, at the end, I think because I'm coming from my first doctorate degree is in education, so my main concern really is having kind of tools in which we can work in the classroom to help students to think about all these things and rethink about their creative processes. So And I suppose it also can respond to the previous question, because perhaps these models, they don't kind of exclude each other. Let's say when I give a class about typology of players, we don't choose like one that is the best typology of player, like, oh, the Quantic Foundry one. No, we do talk about, you know, let's talk about the Quantic Foundry and the BrainX and the Barto, and, you know, lots of different ways of looking at the problem. So at that sense, I think, I hope this model will be an extra tool to work in this kind of context, in educational context. And yeah, as I said before, what's its comparison to each one of the other ones? Well, then I have to discuss each of them separately, but perhaps it will be very similar, and then people have just choices of lens on how to look at the problem. Yeah.
Thank you so much. My question builds up a little bit on both what Jolene brought up and what Johan brought up, both in partial agreement and disagreement. Because so what you're looking at with mechanics is what also several other theoretical frameworks beforehand kind of defined as like, okay, these are kind of like algorithmic elements that build how a game works. However, as soon as you bring in aesthetics and like thinking about, I mean, interface studies, thinking about also user experience studies, mechanics are not immediately elements that contribute to aesthetics, as long as they're not made experienceable on an aesthetic level, so on a visual, on an auditive, on an haptic, on whatever kind of level. So I'm wondering a little bit, where's the interface in all of this? Because everything you showed also heavily relies on visualization to some extent or another, or on audio cues, or on haptic feedback if we play with controllers. So I would love to hear a little bit more about your thoughts on like, okay, where's the interface in all of this? Because I'm currently having a bit of an issue seeing the actual like aesthetic manifestation that you're implying in the model there.
Yeah, I mean, one of the tricky things about such a model is precisely the idea that one could fit in more than one place, so it is never so clear cut as, you know, the model suggests. But I suppose when you talk about interface, I mean, if the interface element has a dimension of giving the player some kind of information, then it would tend to gather in the information category, right? Because it kind of is like something like a mini map. Like if you have a mini map in the game that shows you where the position of the characters are, then it's kind of an information sort of mechanic. It's a mechanic that gives you information. But then obviously a mini map, just like any other thing, has an aesthetic dimension. But then the idea of the model is that you fit into the aesthetics, the mechanics that are aimed at aesthetic admiration, appreciation. So let's say if you can customize the appearance of your character, that's a very kind of a aesthetic sort of experience. Or if you have, you know, I don't know, if you have some kind of mechanics that allow the player to see from different angles the same thing, that's a mechanic that's intended to improve the aesthetic experience. It's not like it's just part of the aesthetic, just anything would be, right? That's specifically for that purpose. Focus on that. I think that would be the point. And I suppose when you talk about interface, there's a lot of things about usability kind of devices that are in between there, because, you know, if you have something like I don't know, adding subtitles, it's kind of making it more accessible. It's easier to the player to understand, but it's not so much about improving the fun, let's say, the engagement of the player, but it's kind of making it more accessible and more easier to use. So I think in game design we have this thing about gameplay and usability, right? Usability sometimes is very close to the concept of creating gameplay experiences, and sometimes it's a bit. So I think there's some usability stuff that's in there, even though the whole idea is focused on engagement, really. Yeah. I don't know.
Thank you. Let's take one more quick question and hopefully quick answer.
Okay, sorry.
Sorry, it's a question for Jolene. What is the game ontology thing that you were talking about?
It's the PhD by Mike Debut.
Okay.
Why he hasn't heard of it.
Oh, okay, we'll close with that. Once again, one last round of applause for Rafael.